All right, everyone, it's time for the occult video number 401 on Marie Laveaux, actually. We've got to talk about this. It ties into medical history, herb lore, all manner of different things. A very interesting character, actually. Born in the early 1800s, probably 1801. I think there are some differing accounts, but it's roughly around that time. Died towards the end of the 19th century, actually. Managed to live quite a long life for somebody of that particular era. If you survive childhood, you'd probably make it into your 60s, maybe into your 80s or thereabouts. Took a little bit more effort. I wanted to talk about Marie Laveaux on a special video here for some occult help that was rendered, actually, the friends in high places sometimes. But I was going to visit the grave, and I was going to leave flowers. But you can't actually do that anymore. So many vandals decided to go and carve X's into her grave. There's a mimetic overlap, by the way, here that we will explain in a moment. That they basically, unless you have a tour group there, they won't let you into the actual cemetery. It's in St. Louis, Plot 1, actually. That's where the parent grave is located, although, again, there's some confusion. Some of the things about her are not necessarily fully canonical. She may have had 15 kids. She may have had 9. We're not 100% sure. Because back then, of course, birth registries and stuff like that were a little bit more slipshod. Things get destroyed in floods, especially in New Orleans. Things get destroyed by fire and things like that. So it's not 100%. There are multiple portraits, actually, of her, but it's not entirely clear whether any of them are actually depicting her. Honestly, though, due to her status in society, probably at least one of those is real. I'm just not exactly sure which one. He was a healer and also basically an alchemist when you think about it. Think of the medical practices of the early 1800s prior to the rise of at least organic medicine and homeopathy. You get that in the 1870s. That's towards the end of her life. What was medicine back then? If you had a toothache, what would they do? Take some arsenic. Here's a lead infusion or something like that. They literally would take lead infusions steeped in wine, actually. They'd melt it in wine and they would inject it into wounds and weird stuff like that. They had Dr. Thunder. I'm not even going to bother describing exactly what that is, but it was mercurial in nature. And so they were poisoning people. If therefore you had a knowledge of herbs, if you were doing root work and things like that, you were saving more people than the actual physicians were. She was apparently lettered, which was exceptionally strange for the time. Actually, she was a freed black woman, actually, and living in New Orleans and sometimes surrounding areas, I believe, if I remember correctly. Very, very interesting. Probably saved a hell of a lot of lives. She also took some. Now, not through voodoo. A lot of people think that voodoo is evil. Voodoo is an African religion. It has nothing to do with the alternative, which is hoodoo, which is the actual, the dark magic aspect of it. It's sort of like when we talk about Western ceremonial magic. Western ceremonial magic can be white magic. You're praying to angels to guide you, to help you, to protect others, whatever. Then you also have demonic side. And the same is true of voodoo. If you have hoodoo or houdon, it's the pronunciation and the lettering sometimes. It depends on whether you're referring to it in English or French. Especially with regards to that particular religion. It can be positive or negative. There's a variety of different kinds of magic. There's the protective side, usually invokes God, an archangel, something. She was a Roman Catholic. You have the other side where it's much more witchy, and that's the side that more people seem to find appealing. And then you have everything in between. Mostly, though, she was a worker of herbalism. During this particular period when they were calling up Dr. Sawbones because you had an abscess and just chopping your limb off or injecting you with mercury or something like that, people lore was very, very important. Yeah, I find it funny because if anything, the one thing that she would be most important for is something that is rarely spoken of, which is her medical practice. Specifically because she predates the organic medicine movement, the homeopathy sort of thing, the Thomsonian system and so forth in her practice, but she was effectively employing it anyway. And that, before you're literally melting people's jaws off by giving them antimonial silver and arsenic and stuff like that. And she was wise enough to simply use herbs. And so she's not a negative figure at all within history. About the only inflicted deaths potentially, and again, we're not 100% sure whether this is true or not, she would visit prisoners and give them poison so that they could off themselves so they were saved from the gallows and stuff like that. This is alleged. We're not sure whether it's true or not. I believe she died in the late 1870s. So again, dying commensurate with the period in which her kind of actual herbal practice became fairly commonplace. People would be fascinated if they only knew about medical history and herbal history. I've edited works, for example, on the subject. And it's funny, people will look at old ads from like the 1910s, the 1920s, and they were telling you, give your kids cocaine drops. Here's this infusion with heroin. I had to take some laudanum. They think that that's crazy, but actually it was an improvement on the prior methodology. And Marie Laveaux was one of the first people to practice it, and she's reckoned a witch for having done so. It roughly overlaps with the medieval period, by the way, as well. And the same thing was true. You'd have the old woman on the edge of society. She's throwing and dispensing a bunch of herbs, often abortifacients, by the way, and she knew what she was doing. Physicians, meanwhile, at the time, what are they doing? Literally cutting people's bodies apart. They didn't even understand basic anatomy. They couldn't have. They weren't even allowed to, in many cases, to actually investigate corpses. This is also the case in antiquity, where some of the best physicians and philosophers who spoke of medicine, they had to go train in Egypt because they weren't allowed to do it in Greece. They weren't allowed to do it in Rome. It was considered to be sacrilege. It was considered to be heresy. It was considered to be desecration. The Egyptians are like, yeah, we know all about the body. Here's just different organs. Here's how you pickle them, by the way, so they can go to eternity and stuff like that. Marie Laveaux was skilled in root work as well. And part of root work is very, very interesting. For instance, I can't remember the exact name of the plant. I wrote about it in Fruits of Eden, but I can't remember the species name. There's a sort of creeper vine that a lot of people will grow like right outside of their door. And the idea is that the devil will trip attempting to enter, your building. There is a very high probability that she actually did this because she was a Roman Catholic. I know under the ritualistic system, that would be very, very likely. It's a fascinating subject. I mean, herbalism and all of those things. Links in the description of my books, blogs. There's plenty of herbalism there. But I have a feeling he might have had a casual interest in alchemy as well, considering some of the operations that are at least casually mentioned in record. And when she died, she was very, very popular, actually. All the high society came to see her when she died, actually. Again, she had at least 9 children. At least a couple of them survived. She was effectively the voodoo queen. So she was the head of that entire movement within New Orleans for the span of much of her life. There's a reason for that, because she was probably lettered. she actually knew what she was doing. Probably saved thousands of people, honestly. Probably saved dozens of people from the gallows, put them out of their misery, basically, euthanasia. Sort of like a pre-Dr. Kevorkian sort of thing. Again, that's not necessarily canonical. If you come to New Orleans and you're going to do voodoo stuff, you're probably more seeing the hoodoo tradition in most cases. Because most people, what are they going to a voodoo practitioner for? Well, I want to curse somebody. Something like that. It's black magic. Whereas Marie Laveaux was mainly an herbalist more than anything else. She was also apparently a hairdresser, which is very, very interesting. So, hail to Marie Laveaux. Thank you very much. And here's your video in lieu of flowers. Unfortunately, powers that be will not allow me to leave them at your grave. That's about all. Peace out.